Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today, my guest is Josh Caravela. He is a global medical director at Leo Pharma. And Josh and I talk about MSL Career Options and the transition from field medical to medical director. Awesome information, really insightful. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and Instagram, and hope you guys enjoy this. Take care. Hey Josh, thanks for joining me, buddy. How you doing today?
Well, thanks, Tom. How about yourself?
I'm great. Looking forward to our conversation. You and I go back a long way. We've been trying to plan this for a long time, so I'm glad I finally got you here. So cool, man. Thanks.
Excellent. My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So let's start. We typically start with intros. So if you can just give a little brief intro on who you are and what you're up to, that'd be awesome.
Definitely. Yeah. So I'm Josh Caravela. I'm a pharmacist. I also earned my MBA, and I'm currently a global medical director with Leo Pharma in the dermatology space, specifically for a biologic launch we have upcoming.
Awesome. That's exciting. And
definitely.
I love your story. So we came up with this topic. We were having dinner and we came up with this topic where you transitioned from a field medical role into a medical director role, which is a really nice, interesting career transition. And one of the things that I always try to talk to, MSLs and MSL leaders is career path and career options. So let's start with your transition and how that went for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, I was always very interested in medical affairs right from the start. And as an MSL, I enjoyed taking on different stretch projects with our medical directors as the opportunities allowed themselves. And I was really attracted to the cross-functional nature of medical direction and how we're able to work so closely with marketing and legal and many of our other colleagues, not only thinking about the data that we have today, but where are we going in the future, which works very closely with clinical development. So for me, it felt like a nice natural progression from my work in the field, engaging with thought leaders on the day-to-day, to then have a broader impact on what our medical strategy would be going forward. So for me, it was a very exciting opportunity to transition and then really to expand the reach that I had for the organization and ultimately for patients, which is why we're here.
Well, let me ask you though, was it hard to get into that role? Like, did you just get lucky? Did you know someone? Were you seeking out the positions? Like, how did you get the job?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of it was that foundation, being very proactive and sharing with leadership and my manager about my development plan and how I wanted to pursue opportunities that might take off a little bandwidth from the current medical directors and allow me to grow. So one of those included an advisory board opportunity where I was really able to help them plan from the beginning. It was actually a virtual ad board. So that was an innovation for the organization. And it was quite exciting to take that on. From there, you have to think about other aspects of what medical directors do as well. So supporting protocol development or planning out future publications, et cetera. So those are different opportunities that you can get involved in. And you may not know off the bat, but I think that's where it comes as inquisitive MSLs. We can ask thoughtful questions to our managers and our medical directors regarding what opportunities there may be. And it's definitely a journey. It's not something that you develop overnight. So it was something years in development where I went from an MSL role actually into an MSL leader role, and then the right time in the right place. And having laid that foundation, I was able to leverage that over into a medical director position.
So you started building up your resume and building up your skills and building up your, kind of creating that background that would align itself so that you were able to transition into the opportunity when it became available.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
Because I think sort of like the MSL role, right? Sometimes it's that catch-22 of you want to break into the MSL role, but if you don't have experience, they don't want you. And at times for a medical director as well, right? If you haven't been a medical director before, there's such competitive roles. Sometimes there's people with 10 or 15 years of experience. So you really need to be hungry and do everything you can to build out that resume so that when you are applying for that job, you can speak to all of the different skills, both actual skills as well as soft skills that you've acquired along the way.
Yeah. So can you talk about what a medical director does so that anybody that might be interested in transitioning eventually can have an understanding of, like, what's the definition? What's an overview of, like, the responsibilities of a medical director?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, it certainly varies depending on the size of your team and your
Sure.
organization for sure. So, it's always dynamic. But I think for medical direction, we focus really on what's the strategic vision for the compound or compounds that you're supporting. So, what's the scientific narrative or overall strategic context so that everything else flows from there, right? What are the manuscripts that we're going to work with our publications teams on? What are the unmet needs or gaps maybe that we're hearing from the field that could inform future clinical studies, or maybe our phase 4 programs that we work cross-functionally with clinical development on, or depending on your organization, phase 4 may reside within medical affairs.
Mm-hmm.
Then we also have a huge component of working with our key top thought leaders, right, through advisory boards and other aspects to continue driving things forward, because this overall scientific narrative or strategy for the compound or compounds continues to evolve with time as we get new data, as we leverage new insights from the field, and as the competitive landscape evolves too, right? So especially if you're even in the rare disease space today, it's getting more and more competitive with new entrants to the market. And so we need to think about what's the so what for patients and providers, as they do have options for what types of information we would need to furnish to help them make the best decision for themselves.
Right. Right. And would you say, is there a different skill set that would be involved for a medical director? And if so, what would those skills be?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of it is cross-functional collaboration, which you
Mhm.
get a lot in the field.
Yeah.
We have collaboration with our CRAs and sometimes with our commercial counterparts. In a medical director role, I feel like that's really amplified, where you're working with many others. So when I talked a little bit about the role of a medical director, it's far more multifaceted than that as well, where you're working potentially with your brand teams on medical review for promotional materials and other aspects. So there's a lot of, I would say, collaboration, stakeholder management with
Hmm.
people who are not necessarily part of your team. So it's how do you identify those common goals and drive forward together, which I think is a great transferable skill from a field medical position that people can leverage. Of
Yeah.
course, you need to have a lot of strategic planning too. So not only where are we headed today, but where do we want that product to be 2 years from now or 5 years from now? Because we're really laying that foundation in the strategy that we roll out, and ultimately the engagement tools or engagement activities that field medical may have, or other medical functions. And then I would say for someone who's coming from an MSL role into a medical director, someone who's really open to feedback, right? Because this is your new foray into something. So I think being a humble learner, someone who definitely has a voice and can speak up because
Mhm.
you're viewed as a strategic leader, but someone who seeks feedback from your cross-functional stakeholders, just like we would seek feedback from a KOL in the field regarding our data or what we can do differently to be a better partner for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would think, just knowing, MSLs and what MSLs do, there's got to be a ton of transferable skills for
Absolutely.
this type of role. I mean, do you agree?
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think from a strategic KOL engagement perspective, that's the day-to-day of every
Right.
MSL, something that excites us. And so I think having that inquisitive nature and our ability to communicate very well can set apart an MSL, maybe from a different type of medical director candidate who's never had field medical experience in the past.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing from my experience that has worked well for me is we have so much interpersonal communication training as an MSL. We have a lot of time to personally self reflect on our KOL engagement, what went well, what didn't go well, what could we have said maybe to leave more of a lasting impact, or where could we have infused yet another question. All of those soft skill communication things sometimes can be taken for granted. And
Yeah.
someone not coming from an MSL role may not be able to bring that to the table, which I think is exceptionally valuable when you're dealing with both internal colleagues and external stakeholders in a medical director position.
Yeah. And what about, you mentioned, you used the word, I heard the word patient at one point. So is there this big, when you're a medical director, is this big focus on, the patient care or patient side of the equation, keeping in mind the patient, not that you don't, it's because it's always about the patient, but how does that differ in the focus of a medical director versus somebody that's in field medical?
Definitely. So, I mean, I think field medical is really, you're on the front lines and you're hearing directly from thought leaders, community physicians, top international KOLs, what's most important for them and ultimately their patients as they make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I think in medical direction, you're harnessing these insights from across the country, or if you're in global medical affairs, across the globe, to hear what thought leaders are saying about their patients. What are the data gaps? What are the unmet needs for future clinical studies? Where do they see this drug matching up as compared with others out there? So it all boils down to patients. I just think in medical director roles, you're going beyond an individual territory and are really in the opportunity to harness all the great work that field medical is doing and that we're uncovering in advisory boards to really build out the strategy of where we're going to go next, which unmet needs from a patient perspective we're able to meet today. Maybe we can do an additional data analysis on clinical trial data that we already have. Maybe we have to embark on something new, or maybe we already have data that's out there, but it's not landing or resonating as well as we could. So maybe we need to massage that message so that the patient does come through and the way that we articulate it, and that the so what remains.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, I feel like knowing all of the field MSLs and MSL leaders that are out there, I feel like there's so many that are really good candidates for these types of roles if they're interested. I know they're hard to get into. They're kind of fewer and further in between. So from your experience, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like, how do they become attractive? Like what are the things that they need to do to become attractive to a hiring manager for this type of role, would you say?
Yeah, so I think, when you build out your development plan, sometimes we tend to continue to sign up for stretch projects that we're good at because we've done it before. But I think we really need to challenge ourselves to find what unmet needs does the organization have, specifically within the medical direction function, that an MSL can contribute to. And take on these new development opportunities that not only move you personally further as a professional, but move the organization further. So finding that synergistic component and building that CV. So again, I think you don't already have the opportunity to support advisory boards, not just the execution, but from the very beginning, baking the strategic component out of what's the unmet need? Why are we having this ad board? What do we need to ask for their feedback about? Maybe there's an opportunity, potentially depending on your organization, to support a publications process. So depending on your MSL role, there could be something where you're in more of a hybrid type position. That could be a way to do it. If someone goes out on a maternity or a medical leave, maybe there's an opportunity for you to have some sort of hybrid position, which some organizations are now offering these days as a way to grow there. I think clinical trials, that can be a gap area for MSLs. They're often focused on the execution, but not necessarily the protocol development and baking it all in from that perspective. So I think thinking strategically about what endpoints are in there, why do you need them in there, where do they fit in the hierarchy from a statistical perspective? There's so much complexity. So I think getting on the earlier end of some of these planning components can really help you to be a very attractive candidate. While having been an MSL and not being a medical director before, there's lots of those skill sets that you can build along the way.
For sure. I know in my world, a lot of the medical director positions that we see available and that our clients ask us to recruit on require an MD. So how hard is it to land one of these roles if you're a PhD or a PharmD?
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely more challenging. And I have a brother who's actually in school at the moment. And I say, you could consider becoming an MD if you'd like, because you might have an easier go at becoming a medical director. But I do think, for the right candidate, pharmacists like myself, PhDs, I mean, we bring a unique skill set. And so you do need to find the right organization that's open to a non-physician, because it's not everyone. So anyone who's ever searched it for medical director postings, they can see that in some cases right off the bat, it says MD or DO required. And that's a non-starter. So I think for individuals who are PharmDs or PhDs, part of it is identifying organizations that are open to that. And another opportunity is finding positions within your current organization. So I'm sure you see this all the time, Tom, but sometimes jumping into a new arena within a different company can be quite challenging as compared with natural progression within your current organization. So going from an MSL opportunity to a medical director opportunity at an external organization can be more challenging at times than natural growth into a medical director position within your current company, because you're already a known entity. Maybe you've been working on some of those stretch projects, you've socialized it through your development plan. So I think that can work quite well for people looking to take that step.
That's a great point. I really think that transition to promotional opportunities is so much easier internally than to try to make that leap externally, because you're building your resume within an organization, you're proving yourself, you become a proven commodity, and you could step right into the role. So I think depending on the size of the organization, what you want to do, what's available, if you can build up that skill set, take your advice, all the stuff that you just mentioned, and apply to internal roles, you might give you a better shot for sure. So
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So you land this role, you transition to a medical director, you're kicking butt, you're smart as heck, you're killing it, because I know you and you've crushed life. But what challenges are there? Like tell me about how challenging the role is and what you've had to overcome to find success in the role.
Absolutely. So I'd say first and foremost, prioritization and when things are good enough was a big piece of growth for me. I think I always knew how to prioritize. I had no challenges with it for sure. But when you get into a medical director position, or at least me, the responsibilities continue to grow and grow and grow. And at times you have external deadlines, like maybe submitting an abstract to a congress or a late breaker presentation. Then you have other internal deadlines for medical review on marketing materials and other things. And they quickly start to converge. And part of that prioritization becomes, what can you delegate, right?
Yeah.
So as an MSL, we don't always have as much opportunity maybe to delegate certain activities. But in a medical director role, really stepping back and saying, okay, well, all of these deadlines are happening simultaneously. And of course, we could work around the clock, but that's not when we do our best work, I don't think. We need time to refresh and be strategic and reflect. So really thinking critically about, are there other individuals who I could potentially delegate this to? Is there someone who is interested in a stretch opportunity that could take this on if I help to train them? And then it works for the both of us. Or are there certain things that maybe even an intern who's there for a longer period of time could take on? So I think part of that prioritization is understanding what things you need to let go of, as well as sometimes when things are good enough. And I think for those of us who have been MSLs and are really the CEO of our own territory, sometimes that can be a little hard to let go of, because we always want it to be, 150% of what we're expecting and to be exceptional. And sometimes when things start to get so busy, it starts to come down to, you could spend endless hours on that final 10% to get it perfect, but it might not really have that much extra impact. So understanding where to balance that, I think, was a key aspect of transitioning into medical direction.
Sure. No, that makes total sense. And I think that when you're working, you keep using, throughout this conversation, I keep hearing, strategic, cross-functional, I think that this role really requires the ability to be resourceful.
Yes.
And to know, because you mentioned delegating and how difficult it is when you're the CEO of your own territory. But in order to really be successful at these higher level leadership type opportunities, when you transition from an individual contributor, from an MSL, or even from an MSL leader to a medical director, that there's always a transition. That's why I asked that question, because I figured you can't just step into it. There's got to be something else. So I think that's great advice. Now, are you, just out of curiosity, I'm sure you're virtual right now, right?
Yes.
But would your role be an in-house role? Are these roles typically in-house?
They are typically in-house for the most part. So prior to these times, I did go into the office most days in the week here in New Jersey. And then I think that COVID has actually really opened our minds to how they can be more virtual in the future. So for myself personally, I'm one of two medical directors on my team that actually sit in the US, and the rest of our team is in Copenhagen. So regardless of whether we're sitting in an office in New Jersey or in a home office elsewhere in the country, we're still having to do quite a few virtual calls to people across the Atlantic. So I think, many organizations are really starting to reflect on, if you have a high performer who's open to networking and really putting in that extra time to have a Teams call impromptu to replace those water cooler type conversations, you can actually be quite efficient. And I think sometimes it's even easier to have a face-to-face touch point with people because we're not traveling all over the world right now. So normally if you go to the office, maybe only half the people are there because someone's at another meeting, someone's at, a KOL meeting, et cetera. So for me, I think it's worked quite nicely in these virtual times where more and more people have embraced the video technology so that we can continue building that rapport and those relationships. But I guess the short and sweet of that answer is yes, traditionally headquarters based, but I think in these COVID times, it's evolving. Some organizations already had them in the field, but I think more and more will open up.
Yeah, I think so. I think we might see a paradigm shift where roles like this, for example, may be flex. There may be the option to be virtual, work from home, at least if not all the time, but maybe part of the time. I don't know. That's just coming from, me seeing the evolution of what's happened over the course of the last year. And, traditionally, yes, in-house for these types of roles, but I think that might change, which could open things up really for a lot of people. And it could make recruiting a lot easier for hiring managers because now they can open up their candidate pool to candidates that aren't just local. So we'll see. I mean, that's left to be determined. Let's talk about the science side of this equation, because I know when I think of the medical director position, I always think science. I always think that there's a scientific focus to it. Is it true that would you say, and maybe I'm making this up or I'm going by my own past prejudice, would you say that there's typically a need for a specific scientific area of focus and expertise in order to land one of these roles?
So I think breaking into your first one, it's really important to play to your strengths, right? So if you've been an MSL, let's say in the dermatology space, like I was, moving over into a medical director position within dermatology plays to your understanding of the landscape, and it makes that curve so much easier to achieve. I think one of the other things too, right, is you have to consider your background. So if I was a physician who was a dermatologist, stepping into a dermatology medical director position would be much easier than if I was pursuing a hematology one, right? Because you're again playing to your strengths there. I think once you have a medical director position and you've been in one for some time, you can jump therapeutic areas just like an MSL would. But again, I think breaking into your first MSL job, it's all about think about what skill sets you're bringing to the table that you can rely on. Then going from an MSL into maybe an MSL manager, or in this case a medical director, you want to play to those strengths that you have. So I do think it would be harder to go from where you are into something completely new. It's not impossible, but I think it would strongly increase your chances of successfully landing that first medical director job if you're looking within the same therapeutic area you're already in.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great advice. Use your strengths. I think that's great advice for really, any job, any transition. So what's next for Josh? What's next for you? Like, where do you go from here?
Definitely. So for me, I'm excited to keep growing and becoming more and more of a strategic leader in the organization. definitely in medical affairs. So having been an MSL, then an MSL leader, now back as an individual contributor, I think that was part of the shift too, right? Because as an MSL leader, there's a lot of delegation baked in, right? But then when you go back into an individual contributor role, there's not always a team of individuals that you can touch bases with. It's a lot of influencing without authority. But I really like the mentorship and helping others to grow and leveraging my experiences to make them successful. So I'd say my next step would really be growing within medical affairs into a more senior leader position to really leverage what I've done to maximize the success of the team to keep things moving forward.
Well, listen, man, I know you'll be successful in anything you do because that's who you are. That's what you do.
Thank
So
you.
last question. So we're in 2021, we're coming out of this whole COVID thing. You've been a field medical affairs leader, you're a medical director now. So what advice do you have for folks in field medical right now that are transitioning hopefully back out of COVID into field visits and face-to-face interactions, or maybe a hybrid of face-to-face interactions and virtual interactions? But what's your advice for those folks?
Definitely. So I would say stay hungry and stay persistent. Think outside the box, right? Something that didn't work 6 months ago may be quite successful now. So I'd say, if you previously were having trouble engaging with some of your thought leaders due to personal challenges or just time that they have in these COVID times, no is only no for now. So, be persistent, follow back up. I would say be energized and refreshed that some of these restrictions are opening up. And if you are in a more restricted area of the country, again, try to continue to think outside of the box for what are ways that we can engage in this hybrid mode or still virtually for some time. But I think the more that we just sort of embrace our day to day, and I think all the silver linings and things, that just makes it a lot more fun. So I'd say keep hustling.
Quote of the week: no is only no for now.
Agreed.
We are going to put that on a t-shirt, a mug, something. We got to, Josh Caravela, no is only no for now. I love that. So let's leave it at that. I think listen, Josh, you're the man. I appreciate you coming on. This was really great advice. I learned a lot, and I'm sure a lot of other people did, but thank you, man. I appreciate your time.
Awesome. And likewise, have a great one. Good seeing you.
See you, man.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future, and feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.